So, sir, let's get back to this issue of uh, of of Nigeria. A lot of people say perhaps the January 15th, 1966 coup was where we got it wrong. But Nigeria was not the only country that had coups in those days. Others have moved on. What would you say? Where, like Achebe would say, where did this rain start hitting Nigeria and us?
Well,
what went wrong?
It's not a one cause thing. Several things happened. But that coup was a critical part of the problem, not necessarily in the event of the coup, but in the military entering the political arena in Nigeria. Why? I think it's largely around what I like to call the dangerous alchemy of soldiers and oil. Why is it a dangerous alchemy? Well, you see, Nigeria was a very carefully crafted federation. Okay? In that federal arrangement, there were checks and balances of sorts from the conventions of engagement. When the military intervened, we can argue about the motives of the young officers from here till tomorrow. People play it any which way is convenient for their own positions. But nobody who really knew those officers would doubt that they were driving some ideal, misguided or not. The main consequence, or the main thing is that the consequence was that the military entered political life. You know, so we entered into an era. The army, having entered political life, we came to a realization. Should have been obvious, but it wasn't so obvious to those who were intervening at the time, that the nature of military rule with the hierarchy of the army was such that it was a centralizing structure. So that people can accuse Iransi, for example, of moving from a federal structure to a unitary structure. When Iransi was shoved aside, it still continued in that direction because it was a very simple logic. The general is at the top, the colonels at the middle, the privates at the, and in the hierarchy of the army, general says jump, colonel says how high, sir, and so on down the line. And so the general at the center appoints the colonel to go and be a military governor. The colonel is not going to question what the general asks him to do. Now, why it's a dangerous alchemy of soldiers and oil is that about that same time in our life, nation's life, oil became a more significant revenue source. So not only did the general at the top have all the power and could literally do whatever he wanted to do and not be questioned by the colonel who is running the state, but there was now revenue coming into the state coffers that the general or the colonel had no need to recourse to the people to pay taxes, because the control of people came from the fact that they pay taxes. You know, as the old American statement, no taxation without representation. In those days, in the 60s, one of the most dramatic scenes everywhere across Nigeria was of tax collectors chasing citizens. And they would be running in Lagos. The race was to Mushi from Western region. The boundary was around that Mushi area. You would run, once you can break through that towards the Luth, you had escaped the Western region tax collectors. You know, So the army stopped, or the government stopped bothering people with taxes. And the gift of oil and the hierarchy of the military distorted the way things could flow, especially because there was a weak intellectual content later down the line. Under the first phase of military rule, with Gowon and the Civil War and all of that, you also had another factor. The brilliant permanent secretaries of that era were significantly products of the London School of Economics. Asiodo, Aida, and so on and so forth. Mebong. And the London School of Economics, with Harold Lasky, Professor Lasky, as the main lever of the ideology of governance that flowed out of LSE. And remembering the history of LSE, LSE came out of Fabian socialism. Members of the Fabian Society founded LSE, founded the Labour Party. So, with their mindset, there tended to be a dirigist inclination, okay, of state control. Compound this dirigism with the fact that oil revenues were now aplenty, and the government, mainly driven by the ideologies of these permanent secretaries, argued for government occupying the commanding heights of the economy. That was the language of the time. And so the general who needed to occupy the commanding heights of the economy simply altered the revenue allocation formula. Nobody questioned him. He could do anything he wanted. From the regions collecting, say, whatever revenue like oil, and sending 50% to the center, federal government collected 100% and sent an increasingly diminishing amount to the subnationals. And at the point in time, even the oil producing states were getting less than 0.05% of actual revenues from oil, because Kalu Idika Kalu, who was Minister of Finance at the point in time, speaking at one concerned professional event, broke it down. By the time you took out the special funds for Ajaokuta, Alaja, Alscon, the so-called 4 A's or whatever, Abuja, and then you share what's left. What actually was getting the oil producing states was less than 0.05% of revenues from crude oil at a point in time. And there is another consequence that mindset creates. It creates a mindset of obsession with revenues. Everything in Nigeria began about revenues and how to share these revenues. Okay? Every quarrel was about who was getting more of these revenues. Now, what the ideology of the time failed to recognize, and this is my biggest pain about Nigeria's development, is that revenues do not make rich. What makes rich is production. And so the more we battled and shared, and the more revenues we got, the poorer we became. My favorite example is the argument made about who is producing, who is getting more, all the fight over should the ratio be 25%, 13%, this or that. Now, give you an illustration. In the 60s, only two levels of government were involved in the fiscal transfers: the national government and the subnational, the regions or states as it became later. Local governments were not involved. Local governments were the convenience of whoever wanted to create them. So, for convenience, the governments in the South ended up having about twice as many local governments as the governments in the North. Not a problem, it didn't affect fiscal distribution, just for administrative purposes. By 75, 76, and the Dasuki Commission, passenger government, local governments, borrowing from traditions in somewhere in Eastern Europe and Brazil, local governments became part of the fiscal transfer system. And the subnationals, the local governments, the third level, were entitled to about 20.9% of the distributable pool fund, so-called FAC account. That's a huge amount of revenues. About 21% of our revenues now go to that tier of government. And who were the powerful young people people around? It was the young colonels in the army. And each of them wanted their village to become a local government. And of course, the majority of the powerful young officers were northern. We ended up with 774 local governments, and now nearly 500 of that were in the old north. So that is a huge revenue shift in its flow in Nigeria. The north has become poorer. And people are wondering what's going on. Nobody's remembering they're getting a lot more revenue. Why are they getting poorer and poorer? It's because we didn't think through the logic of wealth. When the North produced in the early 60s, quality of life was much better than when the North started waiting for revenues to be allocated. They abandoned production and became poor. And you can show it in simple terms in everyday life. It's called the lottery effect. What is the lottery effect? Find me some poor person who won the lottery. 10 years later, I'll show you that he's poorer than he was when he won the lottery. There's a current Nigerian case in the UK, I think. I heard the story somewhere. Some lady, Nigerian lady, who lived in Peckham, who won a couple of £1 million in the lottery. The first thing, her pastor shows up and collects tithes. The money. Then all the members of the church who had problems show up. She's helping everybody. Then she goes and buys a house in St. John's Wood, and she moves. 4 years later, she sells the St. John's and moves back to Peckham. And this is not a new thing. If you go and do economic history of the world, you'll see it. Spain is a classic example. When Spain, with the conquistadores and Cortes landing and displacing the Aztecs and shipping gold back to Spain, the elite of Spain were spending like drunkards, enjoying the good life. The small countries around them, the Netherlands of this world, the Switzerlands of this world, were busy investing in their youth to be more productive. A couple of generations down the line, these countries are far, far, far wealthier than Spain. So there's no magic. Everything that happens, you can, if you know enough, you will know that this is where we're ending up. I could tell you 30 years ago, Nigeria would be where it is today. It's not that I could tell you, I wrote it down. Go and read me 25 years ago. All this mess in Nigeria, I said it will happen. I almost, like a prophet, went close to seeing how it will happen. It's not because I'm intelligent. Other people smarter than me thought it out, and I just basically came to that understanding. We are killing each other, insecurity. Hey, Robert Kaplan wrote The Coming Anarchy around the time of return to civil rule in Nigeria. I read it. I say, hey, this is what is coming. I bought copies. I sent to my friend who was DG of SSS. General Babangida got a copy. General Ali Buzo got a copy. Everything he predicted has happened. I used to host this monthly breakfast meeting at the Lagos Business School. In one of the early ones, like 20 years ago or so, we had amongst those in the house a chap called Brown with the IMF country office in Nigeria was present. And I was making remarks about revenue allocation in Nigeria. And I said, look at how Botswana has cleverly saved revenues from diamond exports into a future fund. In my view, what should make sense? Because revenues from crude oil are meant for Nigerians of all time. God put it in the ground, not for this generation, but for Nigerians forever. If we spend it all now, our children will curse us. Can we take a portion of this revenue, put it in our budget process? Probably not more than $25 from each barrel. And then everything from say 25, at that time oil prices were heading towards the stratosphere. 25 to maybe 50 or whatever, put it in what do I call that fund?
A sovereign wealth fund.
No, that's the third level. This one is
Sinking fund?
no. What?
Sinking fund.
That's what it is, but there's a name that I call it as, and that you can reach. It will invest it, but it's in near money terms. If oil prices were to crash to say $8 as they were in Abacha's time, the difference between that $8 and the standard level we're normally committing to the budget, we would stabilization fund. Stabilization fund. We will take from that stabilization fund and ensure that it doesn't matter that the price of crude oil is $8, the funding of the budget will be still the same constant $20 a barrel. So, and everything above whatever 50, 60 goes to the sovereign wealth fund, so-called future fund. After I finished, this IMF guy came to me after. Say, man, why is your country a mess when there are people like you? You know? But so these ideas have been around forever. There's nothing, no rocket science about them. We've expressed them in the past. That's what's haunting us today.